All right, so a very big welcome to today's Certero Realizing Their Value webinar. My name is Nikki Lewis. I'm Head of Marketing here at Certero, and I will be your host for today's session. Thank you so much for joining us. You should be able to see the presentation on your screens now. Our topic for discussion is Before the Bill Lands, Find and Control Spiraling AI Cost and Shadow AI Risk. And we will look at how to turn runaway AI cost into a line item you and your organization can manage on purpose. Before we crack on with things and I introduce our speaker and subject matter expert, Dan, there is a little bit of housekeeping that I need to go through. So today's webinar should run for approximately 45 minutes in total, and that's inclusive of a Q&A session, which is going to be held at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available to you afterwards. Please feel free to share this with your colleagues if they have not been able to join us in this live part of the webinar. If you do have any questions, please pop those in the Q&A tab on the toolbar of your screen as your microphones have been turned off. We will be answering questions at the end of Dan's presentation. We will also be running a few interactive polls throughout the webinar, so please do get involved. It's always very interesting to get a sense of how you think and feel about the various things that Dan's going to be talking about. Please feel free to make use of the chat tab on your screen if you wish to make any comments or add any thoughts and reactions. Right, now that we've got all the housekeeping out the way, let's get down to business. So what are we hoping that you're going to take away from today's session? So the first big takeaway is going to be where your real AI spend is hiding and why it's bigger than the invoices are that you're looking at. Secondly, we'll discover why procurement, security, FinOps, and SAM each see only a fragment and no one sees the whole picture. And finally, Dan's going to step us through a practical operating model to make the invisible estate a managed, owned line item. So it is now my great pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Dan Whitefield. Dan is a principal consultant here at Certero and a certified Microsoft person, a certified FinOps professional, and a contributor to FinOps working groups that shape the FinOps principles and strategy. He spends his time helping IT and finance teams see what they actually own, what they are actually using, and what it really costs them. His expertise runs across ITAM and software, licensing, cloud, and SaaS cost management. And the newest item on everybody's list is getting visibility and control over AI use across the estate. He is a regular voice at industry events, and he has a rare gift for making licensing make sense. So now, Dan, the webinar stage is yours.
Amazing. So thank you, Nikki, and thanks for that warm welcome. And thanks to everyone else for joining this session today as well. Okay, so just before we make a start, I wanted to clear up a few key terminology areas at the start here. So phrases that I'll be using during the webinar, and we will understand them up front. So SaaS subscriptions, I will be referring to are simply users and subscription costs. Okay, they're calculated as a cost per user, and they are things such as Jira subscriptions. Then we have SaaS consumption or consumption SaaS. So these will work by understanding how many credits you consume multiplied by your contracted price per credit. And you know things like Datadog, Snowflake are all examples of vendors that give you bills in this manner. Then we have shadow IT, an IT spend that is outside of IT's visibility and control, and that's where where users are making use of applications and paying for them on personal or company credit cards. Penultimately, we have shadow AI, and these are AI features and functionality that are built into existing applications that have already been approved by the business, and this is important to support things such as the EU AI Act and other future AI regulatory bodies. Finally, we have CASB, which is a cloud access security broker, and it acts as a security layer between users and cloud services such as 365 and Salesforce. And essentially, this is important because we need to understand how your users are accessing and using cloud and SaaS services. A typical CAS product is Windows Defender. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start to look at essentially the AI costs that you didn't know about. Okay, the real spend here that we're looking at when we talk about organization leaders and following standard processes is wanting to treat AI cost as a cost item and point to the obvious areas that they would have managed as part of other types of cost management. So let's look at the AI vendor APIs. Let's look at the AI subscriptions plans. And we're going to treat that then as our total AI cost. Unfortunately, that is just the visible tip. The real spend isn't arriving in new line items. It's hidden in existing products like 365 Copilots or switched on in Salesforce and bundled into Google Workspace. A huge cost area for organizations today is the marketplace costs that get around procurement processes to procure AI services within hyperscalers. So things such as AI services like Foundry and SageMaker and Vertex, where specifics are paid for but not counted in tokens. This means there's no separate purchase order, no security review, no single owner. And an organization has to start to understand and manage these hidden areas so that they can see the layers of copilots, of agents and embedded AI features that are active across your environment that nobody is tracking as one asset. This is the invisible estate, the shadow AI inside the software that you already own. So whether you're a hospital, a bank, a university, or a retailer, the pattern is identical. The spend is in the tools your people already use today. Okay. Now we're going to look at the spend. And on this slide, you can see essentially where the spend is not where you're currently looking. The natural thing to do when understanding a new discipline like AI is to assume that all new vendors, all the cost is under new vendors and new subscriptions and new purchases. And that's what makes this dangerous. Most of our spend is buried in areas that your current tooling can't see and priced in ways that your current processes cannot manage. So when you look at the statistic here, we can see that only 10% is for new buying. 90% lands on contracts you've already signed. Okay. And we now have to ask ourselves why that breaks the current business operating models. So procurement will look for things like new vendors. Security will reviews and looks for things like new applications, and FinOps reconciles new invoices. When we look at embedded AI, it doesn't announce itself as a new area. It shows up as a price bump, okay, on a renewal. It shows up as you add a feature toggle in an approved application. So your guardrails that were built for things coming in through the front door as new applications are now null and void. And what you're seeing is the cost permeating through the walls of your organization. So what we've got now is the first poll of today's session. So please do your best to answer the poll. And as Nikki said, we'll run through the results at the end of the session. The first poll is around how confident are you that you can see your total AI spend within your organization? Okay, so thank you everyone for answering those polls. As we said, we'll come to those areas at the end of the session as well when we hand back over to Nikki. So what we're going to do now is find out which areas of a business will manage the AI assets that come in as AI spend and why it is that no one owns the full picture. So when you think about an AI asset, really what we want to do is make sure our ownership is associated to that AI asset. And that's a very relevant function so that we can see here on screen everyone has a bit of responsibility out of that, but no one really sees the full picture. So when we talk about security, it sees the application, but not the AI features that are embedded within that application. When we look at SaaS, we see the seats and the users, but we do not actually see the actual usage for additional things such as tokens and consumption. When we look at FinOps, we see the bill of AI services, but not any agreements or negotiations of that bill. And when we look at ITAM, we look at risk management and we look at rising costs per agreement, but we don't understand what business value that actually delivers to our organizations. So the overall message here is about ownership and finding a way to associate that within an organization. And that's doubly important when we talk around areas such as regulated sectors, because compliance teams can assume that IT owns AI, IT teams assumes that the app owner owns AI apps, and the embedded AI quietly touches regulated data with no one accountable. This means your key information is potentially at risk, and that is then a massive problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the session. Okay, so here we're going to look at how to understand why no one owns the full picture and what areas are associated to these things. But here, first of all, we're going to understand why our current tools miss it. So when we start to look at an organization, and we see this in the industry all the time, it's generally that, companies and organizations have invested in CASB software. They've invested in SaaS management software and SAM and ITAM solutions. And they're all good tools, but they don't, and they all do what they should do individually. But each one of those were built for a different problem. So a CASB tool inspects traffic and flags rogue applications when your users connect to SaaS and cloud services, but it cannot see the AI capability that's switched on inside an application that is already approved. So these things come in, and when we're talking about seeping in and permeating through the walls, these are the areas that they come in as hidden and unmanaged AI. So we need to start thinking and tweaking our thinking about approved applications, and that approved applications do not always mean that they are approved work within these applications. A regular review of these things is also massively important, because indeed software can actually identify shadow AI or the functionality within these products. It would be really important. The same logic runs throughout the rest of the stack. So seat counting tools can't see token consumption. Entitlement tools can't report on a per token use. And this is related to the software asset management and SaaS and cloud principles of adoption that I know many people on this webinar are already very familiar with. So it's a well-trodden path for lots of us. And then there's making sure that we associate those skill sets to AI is going to be really important in the future. Then we've also got things like variable costs that we've come across before, but AI introduces usage-based charges that can grow massively through tokens and API calls and agents and automations and model selections. And we're going to look at what that means also a little bit later on in the session. So these are already known about in the cloud world and the FinOps world, and where we have guardrails and policies to manage these areas. And that is exactly what we need to do for AI as well. And it's actually quite interesting, because right now we've seen in the last couple of months, the FinOps Foundation has now launched the Tokenomics Foundation. So it's all centered around understanding your AI costs and relating it back to business value because of the explosion of AI costs within organizations. And that's actually been unprecedented for what we see in the industry. So the current tools aren't broken. They're just really pointing at the wrong areas within your organization. And that's what we need to start to manage as people who are taking control of AI spend. Okay, so next what we're going to look at is our shadow AI, and understanding that really shadow AI is not shadow IT, because sometimes it gets filed under shadow IT. The problem is with shadow IT, you don't know about the applications that you use as a potentially using. With shadow AI, you do know about these applications. You just don't know about the areas that people are using and the features and functionality that they're using from an AI's perspective. So if we look at this infographic here on the screen, we can see that an IBM survey has seen that from 2025, that's seen that 68% of employees use unauthorized AI tools. Now, that's not just a small problem. That is the majority of your users within your organizations that are using AI, unauthorized AI tools. And, what we need to do is to understand what these people are actually doing and feeding into these AI tools. And from that, 54% of those tools are fed with sensitive company data. So you can imagine the sorts of issues that this can cause for organizations. If you go and paste into a public cloud model, you can move source code, you can move customer records, you can move commercial terms outside of your control within seconds. There's no logs, there's no recalls, there's no boundaries to where this lands. Your old shadow IT processes won't even cover this. Shadow AI needs its own discovery and its own governance lens. And when we talk about things like patient data in the healthcare industry and financial data in the banking sector and citizen data in the public sector, student and research data in higher education organizations, it's a really fine line between productivity gain and a notifiable breach of data that's happening within your organization. So really, we need to get on top of this as soon as possible within our industry. Okay, so here we're going to look at the impact of shadow AI. Because of what we've seen and what we've talked about in the last slide, people who've got shadow IT, that's people using an application that's outside of IT's control. And it's almost an in-house problem. We're going to start to say, who's using this application over here? That's not authorized. Let's bring it back under control. But when we look at shadow AI, it's a lot more serious because the implications are massive of putting company-sensitive data out into the wild. If you're doing things like sharing source code in Claude because you want to make it better, well, that's potentially escaped. That's escaped out of your control, and it's not something that you can easily, and in some cases at all, bring back under control. So what that means is that you need to start to make sure that you've got the guardrails and the policies and procedures and the tools in place to make sure that this doesn't happen right from the start. It's a problem that you will be able to identify and figure out in the future, but everyone needs to start thinking about this right now. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about, and we promised to look into this earlier in the session, is about the ways in which your vendors are charging you for AI. And what we've got here is your typical one. So when we look at 1, 5, and 6 on this screen, those are flat rate per seat. That's the number of people that you have, okay, and the cost per user. Then you've got tiered personas, and you've got hybrid costs. So think of tiered personas as 365 E5s and E3s and F3s. You've got different tiers that you pay for. Then you've got your hybrid area, and that's, again with the 365 example, am I paying for a 365 subscription, and then potentially am I using Power BI, and is that being paid for a server or a company level, okay, as well as a user subscription? So that's a hybrid way of paying for things. Now with AI, we can see additional areas that we sort of already know about, but that come into procurement worlds and software asset management and SaaS worlds, and we need to understand what those mean from an AI perspective. So bundled price rises, those are things that are coming in as additional costs within the applications and services that you're already using. And then you've got things like token and credit pools, and this is similar to utilization. So your tokens and your credit pools, and they seem to have really increased just recently. The ability to create things like self-managing AI agents and areas. These will sometimes cost organizations lots and lots of money, and it's something that we need to bring back under control. And then you've got companies charging you per outcome, so per agentic AI outcome. If you're doing something, if you've got something, for example, a chatbot running, and how many times does that respond, you pay X amount of pounds, dollars, or euros based on how many outcomes you're getting out of that particular tool. So this all comes to say that it's really important to understand all of the ways in which your organizations are being charged for AI, as procurement people, as cost managers. When we look at tokenomics in these areas, we want to make sure that we're understanding those cost areas and how we're being charged for them. And we want to understand the whole picture. So, if I'm being charged a token-based level, a service-based level, a user and subscription-based level, when we look at hardware, is it a GPU level? Okay, is it an on-premises or a hyperscaler level? That's what we need to understand when we talk about total AI costs and the different ways that we're being charged for AI. Okay, so now we're going to go into our second poll of the session. Who owns AI cost governance in your organization today? So please add your answers into the poll, and then we'll make our way into the next area of discussion. Okay, so thanks again for voting. From a agentic perspective, okay, what we're going to look around now is the agentic cliff and what is coming. When we understand what's going on within these areas, we've got fleets of agents consuming tokens within an organization. Most of them are switched on without an influence to cost modeling. They're done in a way that the prototype will be built into a specific model of AI, and that means that your procurement decisions are being made right at the start of producing something, of a sandbox environment, of prototyping, of whatever you want, and building something within your organization. Now, if and when that gets productionized, then you're going to have a specific model that you need to do, unless you want to rip it apart and start again. So we've seen this in the SAM and the SaaS world when we talk about SQL licenses, and we sort of look at people adding in things like enterprise SQL for a bit of development work on a 32 core virtual machine. Or if I go into Claude and I start using Fable, right, it's going to all come at a cost. And that's what we need to start to understand. When we see what's going on with agents today, these things here when we look at this statistic from Gartner right now, that 40% of the agents that were built in 2026 will be cancelled by 2027. And that's because of unclear value to the business. So people are building a load of agents. They're doing this wonderful stuff with AI. It's a great tool to have, but where's the business value for that? I might be creating something that's fantastic for helping me in my job, but where does our business and our organizations gain value from it? Enterprises are starting to postpone their spends to buy time to understand what they're paying for. And this is pressure that really lands at board level. So 98% of boards are pushing for information on return on investment when it comes to AI, and the discipline now and the discipline now gets caught up. So as we mentioned earlier, FinOps now names AI as the top priority for cost management in 2026, and it goes back to that data about they've now created a tokenomics foundation right next to the FinOps foundation just to manage this AI beast. Okay, so everything that we've looked at today comes from one or two root causes, but the main one is fragmentation. Okay, and the fix is to stop counting applications in isolation and assembling the full AI asset into a single connected picture and then act on it. The gap that we see that we built Certero X to close, and bridging the three disciplines that operate today in isolation are CAS style discovery and SaaS management, okay, FinOps, and then ITAM and SAM, and bring all of that into one single capability for your organizations. What we're going to look at next is what good looks like and what we can do from a process perspective, because as with most things in this industry, you're going to look at the 3 Ps. You're going to look at process, people, and product, and that gives you the ability to then say, what should my processes look like? So in here, and lots of people on the call will recognize this sort of life cycle, where we talk about SAM life cycles, SaaS life cycles, or hardware life cycles. You're going to go and discover something. So you can discover your embedded AI. You're going to attach an owner. So that goes back to us talking about making sure we've got ownership against every area of AI. Then you're going to connect usage to the cost. You're going to identify any renewals and the impact of those. You're going to trace where your data comes from, and then you're going to map the entitlement to those things. And that is an ever sort of green, an evergreen sort of life cycle management for AI. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have the last poll of the session. So thanks again for listening along. Please do answer the question about what's your biggest AI cost worry when heading into your next renewals. Okay, and then we're going to finish off with another couple of slides before we go into the Q&A session. So cool. So thanks for answering those polls. What we're going to look at now is your typical operating model from the UAI perspective. So what we offer up from Certero is simply best practice in the industry. So when we look at these areas, we will understand visibility first of all. So what we've talked about is SAM visibility, ITAM visibility, SaaS and cloud visibility, all around any services that you see for AI. So AI applications, Vertex and Gemini and your Foundry and OpenAI and Anthropic and whatever it is, get that visibility in as much as you can. Simple with the same areas that we look at from a software asset management perspective, and from a shadow IT and SaaS management perspective, you want as much data as you can get your hands on. Once you've got that data, then you need to put understanding around that data. So observability. What can I do? Where is the value of this data that I'm bringing in? And what can it tell me about the way that I'm using my AI services? Then you've got your management of these areas. So quite simply, if I come into my AI, how can I optimize these areas? How can I maybe use a less expensive model? Okay, what can I do to save money and to stop the ever-growing spend around that? Then from a governance perspective, we want to understand essentially the guardrails that are in place to stop me doing maybe overspending when it comes to these areas again. So what can I do to actually help my teams make sure that they are not going outside of policy, outside of the models that we want people to use, outside of the areas that we want people to use AI in. It might be that we've got a ring-fenced area for all of our development teams go and sandbox in. So making sure that those guardrails and those policies are in place is super important. Okay. Finally, we're going to talk about the what we've learned today. So essentially we've been left with in here the idea of making the invisible estate a managed line item, getting that visibility, making sure you've got owners, okay, and making sure that actually your whole AI spend is being managed and owned within your organization. Then once you've got that and you've identified those gaps, you want to identify the business value that is happening from that spend within your organization. So what am I spending? How is it benefiting my business? And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Nikki, and thank you everyone for listening so attentively today.
Wow, Dan, thank you so much. That was information overload, to be absolutely honest. But I think one of the things that I found really, really interesting was the agentic AI cliff. Seeing that 40% stat was quite something. We have a question in the chat, and somebody else has actually also messaged me privately. So I will be getting to the questions in a sec. But let's have a look at our polls because there has been some interesting stats coming through on the polls, which I thought would be quite good to look at. So let's just have a see here. So the first question we asked was, how confident are you that your organization's total AI spend today, whether you can see it all or not? And we've got over 70% of people saying that either not confident or they have no real visibility. Is that something that you are seeing either with customers that you're talking to currently or when you were at FinOps earlier this year?
Yeah, really good point, and absolutely right. So it's interesting that the visibility is essentially the one of the first areas that we need to start to get data in for. People might have point solutions. They might have a FinOps tool. They might have a ITAM SAM tool. They might have a SaaS tool. When you talk about the FinOps Foundations AI certifications, right? They talk about getting the information from your cloud tool, but then adding SaaS and ITAM and hardware information into there. So it's not really, it's not really a trodden path just yet, but definitely something that we need to be thinking about in the future. Definitely something that Certero can help with as well.
Nice. All right. Next poll question was, in your organization, who owns AI cost governance today? So again, 66% of people said that there was no single owner or it was unclear. And then 13% said FinOps or finance, and 13% said IT or security. Again, your experience, is that sort of trending out that way? What do you think around those statistics?
I mean, probably to be expected, right? There's definitely a dilution of where these things are managed from across organisations. I would say that the security teams and the application teams are probably the most that we see that are being associated to that, if at all you know what's going on, right? So if you sort of have an idea, then it's generally those teams that we see that are being attributed with ownership of these AI services and applications, right? So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. And then our last question, your biggest AI cost worry heading into your next renewal cycle. A very mixed bag here, with all of the above taking 31%, but then everybody chiming in with regards to whether it's either usage token cost running over budget, price rises on software that they've already got licenses for, shadow AI and and data risk. And then proving the ROI to the board. So it seems to be across the board that people have concerns with regards to the AI cost.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it's also about which role you're sitting in and which people you're reporting to, right? So if you're talking to leadership all the time, then you're talking about ROI. But then if you're talking to cloud engineers, then we're talking about token consumption all the time, right? So it really does depend, and that's why the collaboration across an organisation and the FinOps principles that are already there in place are super important to make sure that we're managing this thing in the proven, in the proven sort of framework that's already out there for what we're doing.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Right, audience, if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. So we have a question. You said only about 1/10 of AI spend is genuinely new buying. The rest is arriving inside contracts we have already signed. What does a finance team actually look for on a renewal quote to spot it before they sign?
I mean, this is a sort of a loaded question, right? Because as software asset managers and procurement people, we already know that this is all around the processes for stuff that we already do with vendors, right? So if you are going to look at your renewal and you're going to say, 5 days before renewal, oh, I've got a renewal coming up and I'm just going to renew with what they've given me as a bill, okay, then that doesn't give you the opportunity to go and investigate, to optimize, to understand why this bill is going up. So making sure that you're, alerting yourself X number of days before this renewal, that gives you the opportunity then to go out there and understand why these things are going up. You might say, I'm just looking at a 10% year-on-year rise in my software costs, right? And that's going to include AI. Now, so one vendor's 25%, another vendor's 5%, then, overall, you might come out of it and say, well, this is just expected rise. As procurement people, as people that are looking for optimizations, you can definitely, make sure that you do a better job around those things for sure. And that's all about being proactive with these areas that we already know about from the software asset management world.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Got a question here, very specifically around the Certero X solution. So Stephen wants to know, does Certero X report on AI token usage at a user level or a department level? And that, I think maybe that's an and or department level.
Yeah, so interestingly, it does. So we pull back in consumption usage from individual AI vendors. So things like Anthropic, you can set up connectors to Grok and Cursor and OpenAI. But we also bring back information directly from the hyperscalers. So if you've hooked up into Azure and AWS, and not just from the hyperscalers, but also their marketplaces. So all your different avenues that you can actually go and buy these areas through, then yes, absolutely, we pull that information back into Certero. You can see the tokens. Now, merely tokens are great, right? You can understand how many tokens you're consuming, input and output tokens. What do I ask AI? What's it giving me back? What API calls is it making? You can see all of that. But the real denominator is the spend, okay? The spend, because you might be spending 500 million tokens in Anthropic, and you might be spending 10 billion tokens in OpenAI. The real common cause between that is the actual spend that you're spending. Then you need to relate it to business value. So if what we pull back for you are the projects that these things are on, right? And then from there you can associate ownership as well. So in that area, you want to understand: is it research? Is it production? Is it another area of the business that is spending this amount of money? And what is the value to us as an organization then? So we give you the tools and we give you the data to be able to do that. And then from a customer's perspective, they can associate the ownership, they can associate the business units, and then they can go and find out, what are we doing in these areas this making us spend this sort of money, and what is the business value then around these areas.
Nice, lovely.
So good question from Stephen.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Stephen. One question that hasn't come up on the chat here, but was sent through to me, was somebody asked, what is on the Certero X roadmap with regards to AI and just with regards to AI consumption, and how we're going to be tracking AI.
Okay, so yeah, again, back to the point I made earlier, we already have these things in place. When we went to the FinOps X event in San Diego, it was interesting to see that lots of companies are trying to talk about how they have some sort of AI tool in place or some sort of tracking of AI costs, but certainly an individual point solution is at best what we saw there. From the Certero's perspective, we can track hardware, GPU hardware, right, and AI-ready services and applications within that hardware. We can track generative AI and ML and other areas of AI subscriptions and the users that those are associated to, and the costs around that, and also all the token consumption as well. So, the real areas that you need to bring together we can already do that in our single platform. So yeah, that's a really interesting question as well. Certainly something that we want to be showing to our customers for sure.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you, Dan. I think sort of as a follow-on to showing customers what Certero X can actually do. If anybody would like to book a demo, the QR code is on the screen, so feel free to give that a snap, and the team will very happily take you through the platform, and you can have a see to its capability. Dan, thank you so very much. Really appreciate your insights and the clear way in which you've explained the challenges that so many organizations are facing and will continue to face. I think, as you mentioned, this problem is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's certainly here to stay and just grow exponentially. Audience, a massive thank you to you for attending and participating in the polls, and for submitting your questions. We really appreciate that. Our next webinar has been scheduled for the 10th of September. We're going to be talking about how organizations can reduce carbon consumption and cut energy costs, something that many organizations are striving to do to meet sustainability goals. And so as soon as we have that up and ready for you to book in, we will send you through the link for that. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, so a copy of the recording will be sent out to you. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at the next Realizing the Value webinar. Thank you.